going to start the French Revolution. I think the last class, I think the Monday class, got through the first 2 lessons maybe. So anyway, we got to go fast though. Okay, so this is, you know what? I'm just going to put up the answers. There we go. Name that estate. So in France, there were 3 socioeconomic groups. Okay, the first estate was, and if you want to write down what I underline, that's kind of the key point, but basically the church. And in France, the church would be the Roman Catholic Church. So priests, bishops, archbishops, they were the first estate. Okay, here's a key point. They paid almost no taxes. Okay, and if you want to write down any of those are other things that the book mentioned. Okay, number 2, second estate was the nobility. So church was number 1, nobility was number 2. Also paid almost no taxes. Okay, and then the third estate, most of the population, okay, and I've got a little graphic we're going to look at in a minute. It includes a very wide range of people. So the middle class, or the French term is the bourgeoisie. So that could be anyone from very well-educated lawyers, could be doctors, could be wealthy merchants. Sometimes some of these members of the bourgeoisie were wealthier than some of the nobility. So they could have been very wealthy. They could have been well-educated. They knew Enlightenment ideas. So it kind of ranged from that group all the way to urban workers, to peasant farmers. They loved them some Enlightenment ideas about people's rights. And they paid almost all the taxes. Okay? That's a great question. I love that question. Then what makes you a noble, right? If maybe you didn't have a whole lot of money. So basically what it is they owned land. So if you think, and a lot of this goes back to feudalism. So in feudalism, the nobility, they owned the land. And so some of them were wealthy, right? Some of them had good land, and they were very productive on their land. But some of them, maybe they didn't have good land. They had, I don't know, like natural disasters could have happened, whatever, but they were not as wealthy. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Okay, so let's look at my little graphic here. Hint, hint. The first and the second estates were sometimes called the privileged estates because they were basically exempt from taxation. Again, that's a carryover from feudalism, right? Where there's like that little saying, those who work, those who fight, those who pray. Right? And so those who prayed, the church, and those who fought, like the nobility, they would be the knights or whatever, they were like, that's our service, so we shouldn't have to pay taxes. It's those people who work who should have to pay taxes, right? Hint, hint, so this is for today. I know this is kind of a duh question, but I just wanted you to observe, right? And so you could see the numbers from the graphic, and also it very much illustrates, but the third estate was by far the largest, so I put a duh on there. But yeah, so you might think, well, there were so many more people in the third estate, so you know, what's the problem about them paying the taxes? Well, they were also some of the poorest people. Except for the bourgeoisie, a lot of these people were very poor. and didn't have a lot of money to spare to pay in taxes. Plus, they thought it was not fair. Look at this political cartoon. So it's the first and second estate on the back of the third estate. And I found that translation for the little caption there. So that kind of, wait, where's my note guide? That kind of sets up that. So I know on the note guide, write down some things about estate. 1, 2, 3. Oh, and 4 forces for change that helped lead to the French Revolution. Okay. We'll do just a couple more points. Yeah, and then we'll go to break. Yeah. Okay. We've already talked about number 1, right? You've got 3 estates. The wealthiest 2 do not pay taxes. So you've got an unbalanced tax system. We already talked about that. Our book talked about economic problems, so see above. Also, add to that the rising cost of living. There was inflation happening. In France, our book says that the price of bread doubled in 1789, so that's inflation. The government was running up a lot of debt. Some of it was inherited from earlier French kings. Some of it was the current French king and queen living a very lavish lifestyle. Also, they had debt. Wars are expensive, and they had just fought in the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. And remember, they supported the Americans in the American Revolutionary War. So all of that was contributing to economic problems. Political inefficiency. Louis the 15th and Louis the 16th were not great leaders. Okay, and then add to all of this, you have Enlightenment ideas. Suddenly, you've got people who are saying, hey, people should have rights to have a voice in government. Government should be in place by the consent of the governed, right? What is this with absolute monarchy, right? People having rights versus a strict state structure. They looked over at the American Revolution and said, hey, those guys are making these Enlightenment ideas happen. Look at them. They're successful. So, yeah, so all of that. So those are 4 forces for change. Okay, we will do 2 more, and then we'll go to break. Okay. What was Louis the 16th's solution to this economic crisis? Anybody remember? What did Louis the 16th do? Good job, Lillian. Yep. Olivia, Alex, Addie, good. Yeah, this to me would make sense, but no. It's not going to reduce his expenses. Don't be ridiculous. Okay. It was tax the nobility. Yeah, they're not going to borrow money from Great Britain. They're like enemies right now. So yeah, I'll just tax the nobility. Okay, and how did the nobility feel about that? I'll give you a hint. Yeah, not great. That's a good, yeah, not too good. Nobility be like, nope. Okay, so, I love that little Timon. Okay, so, let me just pop this up here. So, some of the people in France started saying, Louis the 16th, you can't, you don't have the power to change the tax laws. The Estates General has the power to change the tax laws. Okay, what was the Estates General? It was a representative body comprised of the 3 estates, or representatives, right, of the 3 estates. But it was kind of like an early version of Parliament. Like when Parliament first happened in England, its main role was like an advisory, right? It didn't meet all the time. It was just like the king called Parliament when, you know, he needed money, or, you know, whatever. Same thing in France with the Estates General. So it was just whenever the king felt like calling it. Get this, the Estates General had not been called since 1614. Okay, so Louis the 16th says, I need some money, so I got to call the Estates General. First time in 175 years. All right, so he calls the Estates General May 5th, 1789. Okay, so what led to his calling at the Estates General? He needed money. He needed to change, or he wanted to change the tax laws. How did that go? Not too good. Okay, so the traditional way that the Estates General operated was that each estate got one vote. Okay, but the problem is the first two estates had a lot more similar interests. They were the privileged estates, and they always outvoted the third estate. They kind of ganged up on the third estate. So the third estate was like, nope, we're not going to vote. So they spent the whole first month arguing over how are we going to vote. Finally, the third estate said, we're out. And they formed what they call the National Assembly. Okay. Then the rest of the members of the Estates General locked the door and wouldn't let them in the building. So they met on a tennis court. It's like an indoor tennis court, and they swore the tennis court oath. Okay, and they said, we shall not disband until France has a written constitution. Sorry, that's even worse than the British accent. Wow, I'm terrible at accents, but basically that's what they said. Okay, they said we shall not disband until France has a written constitution. Okay, so let's storm the Bastille and then we'll take a break. Okay.